Honorable House of Assembly do adopt the standing report to the Standing Finance Committee on the estimates of expenditure for the fiscal year 2022-2023 in the sum of $1,842,813,200, and do agree that the said sum do form a charge against the consolidated fund and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I am humbled but privileged to present to this Honorable House the St. Lucia Labour Party's administration's first national budget and the estimates for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023. Since the overwhelming mandate given to it by the people of St. Lucia on July 26, 2021. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, the estimates of revenue and expenditure statement is a precursor to the budget address, which will facilitate the introduction of the appropriation bill to Parliament on April 26, 2022. The pandemic's persistence and the Russia-Ukraine war present considerable downside risks, which warrant innovative and transformative policy interventions. These estimates aim at providing the platform for sustained growth, supporting the continued robust performance of our tourism industry, expansion of construction in the public and private sector, encourage prudent, responsible and transparent fiscal management, implementing tools that will assist in significantly reducing waste and unnecessary spending, developing institutional frameworks designed to eliminate corruption, and an environment where there is substantial reduction in revenue from fuel. In essence, Mr. Speaker, the estimates of expenditure will fund projects that will put people first. Mr. Speaker, budget implementation performance for the 11-month period based on latest available data has generally been satisfactory. Notwithstanding the fact that we continue to face several challenges, including the current COVID-19 pandemic, the recent international developments in Eastern Europe, and the internal administrative constraints that we intend to address. Mr. Speaker, in the resource area, uncertainties concerning timely receipt of budgetary support funds, complicated government's cash flow management, and managing the growth in the stock of payables. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fundraising challenges, the government anticipates that by the end of March 2022, total resources that would have been used to finance the budget would have amounted to $1.584 billion, comprising $1.031 billion in domestic revenues, $54.98 million in external grants, $326.6 million in loan disbursements, and $171.4 million in treasury bills, notes, and bonds. Mr. Speaker, with just a few days to go before the end of the fiscal year, preliminary data suggests an expenditure of $1.584 billion, indicating underspending by some $54.29 million, or 3.3% below the approved estimates for the fiscal year 2021 to 2022. Of the total amount projected to be expended by the end of the fiscal year 2021-2022, Mr. Speaker, recurrent expenditure is forecast to achieve a utilization rate or an outrun of 96.1% of the approved estimates of $1.359 billion for the current fiscal year. The outrun is influenced primarily by the deferment in payment of salaries to public sector workers and lower than program outlays for project management expenses. Let me read that again, Mr. Speaker. The outrun is influenced primarily by the deferment in payment of salary increase to public sector workers and lower than programmed outlays for project management expenses. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, employee compensation, which includes the cost of wages and salaries to employees and retirement benefits to pensioners, is expected to fall short of its target by 46.4 million based on the expenditure trend for the past 11 months. As stated previously, this outcome is attributed to the continued deferment of salary and wage increases, coupled with the impact of delayed recruitment to fill funded vacancies in the budgets. A notable change which impacted this expenditure line is the reclassification of salaries for some employees of Victoria Hospital who were seconded to the OKEU Hospital. Mr. Speaker, with respect to debt servicing, the government of St. Lucia benefited from debt service suspension by bilateral agencies such as the Agence Française de Développement, AFD, and the reduction in the variable interest rates such as LIBOR rates on loans from the Exim Bank. As a consequence, preliminary data indicates that total spending on debt servicing is likely to register a reduction of approximately 7.5 million to reach a total of 293.38 million by the end of this fiscal year. A total of 169.53 million is forecast as the outrun for interest payments, while principal repayments is anticipated to come to 123.8 million, which is slightly below the approved estimates. Based on the projected outrun, interest payments and principal repayments are expected to fall below the 2021-22 approved estimates by 3.19% and 1.55% respectively. Based on the current expenditure trend for transfers, total spending on this category is forecast to increase by 26.6 million when compared to the approved estimates of 149.76 million for the period under review. This increase was primarily influenced by the reclassification of compensation expenditure as grants and contributions to allow for payment of commitments under the Millennium Highway Complex. Additionally, various initiatives in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, namely income support granted to the bus drivers, are also expected to contribute to the positive variance for this expenditure line. The payment of school facility fees by the government and the reinstatement of the subvention to the St. Lucia National Trust are also contributors to the projected increase. With respect to the goods and services, which is the largest category, expenses are expected to fall below the approved estimates for the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 by 22.05 or 6.8%. This performance is attributed to combined effects of lower spending on training, supplies and material, operation and maintenance and consultancy services, which offset increased expenses for rent and hire. The outturn onto the rental and hire vote indicates an increase of 3.6 million to reach a total of 74.9 million by the end of the fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, based on the current rate of implementation of some major projects over the past 11 months, we now estimate an outrun on the developmental side of the budget of 377.06 million. Some of the major contributors to the expected outrun include the Viewfort Water Sector Redevelopment Project, the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, Constituency Development Project, Road Improvement Maintenance Program, PROUD Project, and the Emergency Response COVID-19 Project, and the National Roads Rehabilitation Program. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting that despite significant underspending for some grant-funded projects, this has been offset by a higher than programmed expenditure on others, owing to more rapid execution and disbursements for major loan-funded projects such as the Viewfort Water Sector Redevelopment Project and the Road Improvement Maintenance Program. Of the total amount projected as the outrun for projects, 276.6 million are expected to be expended on capital acquisitions, buildings, schools, human resource centers and hospitals, and infrastructure, roads and utilities. Mr. Speaker, I have provided you with the expenditure outline for the operations of government and will now give a brief summary of how we have and continue to finance these obligations. Mr. Speaker, on the revenue front, there was an improvement in domestic revenue performance during the 11th-month period of the current fiscal year, surpassing the outcome for the entire 2020-21 fiscal year by 45.48 million, or 5.2%. Based on this development, domestic revenue is expected to generate a surplus of 23.44 million, equivalent to 2.3% over the approved target of 1 billion. This is expected to result from a 2.1% increase in tax revenue to an outlay of 927.85 million and a 7.7% increase in non-tax revenue, reflecting a projected outlay of 99.78 million. Mr. Speaker, despite the better performance against the approved estimates for 2021-2022, total revenue and grants is projected to fall short of the forecast by an estimated 39.93 million, as the projected shortfall in grant receipts is expected to outweigh the improved recurrent revenue performance. Notwithstanding the shortfall projected for the year, the outlay for total revenue and grants is anticipated to result in an increase of 152.79 million relative to the outcome of the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Mr. Speaker, preliminary figures for the recurrent revenue indicate that since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared in 2020, collections have been much stronger than expected and have produced positive results in all tax revenue lines, save for excise tax, imports, and stamp duty. We now estimate the outlay for the recurrent revenue to be in the region of 1.027 billion, compared to the approved estimates of 1.002 billion. This 25.92 million higher than our initial target for the fiscal year and 147.46 million higher than the outlay of 2020 to 2021. This positive performance is expected to come mainly from the following major categories. Taxes on income and profits is forecast to achieve a surplus of 16.91 million compared to the estimates. Taxes on goods and services, an average of 11.3 million is projected by year-end, the main contributor being 17.5 million and 10.12 million surplus from import duties and service charge respectively. Notwithstanding a modest improvement in receipts from import duty, which is expected to achieve a surplus of approximately 10.12 million, the performance is likely to be offset by significant shortfall in collections from excise tax on imports. Mr. Speaker, from the customs and excise end, excise tax on imports is expected to register a shortfall of approximately 19.1 million, reflecting the gradual erosion of the $4 per gallon charge on unleaded gas from the start of the fiscal year. On the in-revenue side, Mr. Speaker, a shortfall of 13.85 million is forecast by year-end for stamp duty, owing to the lack of success in defending the government against a legal challenge to payment of the tax from the sale of the Bank of Nova Scotia to the Republic Bank Limited. Mr. Speaker, grants receipts from friendly donors and partners are expected to register a significant shortfall, estimated at 66.28 million, when compared to the approved target of 121.26 million for the fiscal year 2021-2022. The underperformance is influenced primarily by non-receipt of funds owing to delays in implementing key projects such as the Millennium Highway West Coast Road upgrade, the restructuring of the cul-de-sac bridge, generation of employment for private sector, and building resilience for adaptation to climate change and climate vulnerability, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, based on the developments outlined previously, government's fiscal operations are expected to indicate a narrowing of the fiscal deficit from a target of 383.79 million, or 7.9% of GDP, in the approved estimates to an estimated 374.27 million, or 7.6% of GDP by year end. When added to the principal repayments, a total of 498.12 million is projected to be disbursed from loans and treasury bills and bonds. The projected outturn anticipates total disbursements towards expenditure in the following manner: loans, 326.64 million; treasury bills and bonds, 171.47 million. Mr. Speaker, allow me to present to this Honorable House the first budget proposals of my administration. This proposal has the following objectives: support government's agenda of economic transformation, job creation, particularly among the youth, accelerated economic recovery and growth, and reduction of poverty and increased wealth creation. I am aware that our island is acutely vulnerable to external shocks and natural disasters and the effects of the COVID pandemic. It is against this background that I propose to spend a total of 1.842 billion, the largest budget in St. Lucia's history. Out of this amount, 1.349 billion is proposed to be spent on recurrent expenditure, 382.6 million on capital expenditure, 110.5 million on principal payments or what we sometimes refer to as amortization. The total that we expect to receive in revenue and grants is 1.327 billion. Total revenue, tax revenue, 1.016 billion, non-tax revenue, 133 million, and capital revenue, 10.7 million. Grants amounting to 176.6 million. We are projecting an increase in our GDP to 5.47 billion, which in part explains our projected increase in revenue. As a prudent government, we propose to change the trajectory of our primary as well as overall balances. With respect to wages and salaries, Mr. Speaker, our records indicate that from year to year, employee compensation represents an average approximately of 33.25% of the annual total budget. In the 2022-23 budget, a total provision of 590.70 million for wages and salaries, of which a sum of 560.56 million, or 94.89%, has been programmed to cover personal emoluments to central government employees, while 30.13 million has been allocated to cover compensation and other benefits to project staff. A sum of 108.55 million has been allocated to retirement benefits, of which 14.15 million is in respect of employee contributions to National Insurance Corporation. Overall employee compensation is programmed to increase by 11.88% relative to the outturn for the current financial year. The allocated amounts also makes provision for in-year promotions and other salary and wage allowances. Public servants will be pleased to note that the government will keep the promise made by the former administration and pay the increase in salaries at the end of April 2023. Mr. Speaker, debt service obligations is central to every budget as we continue to implement policies geared towards prudent debt management and debt reduction. Debt service payments totaled 285.03 million for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023, a reduction of 5.3% relative to the approved estimates of 2021-2022. A total of 150.7 million has been set aside to service domestic debts, while 133.83 million has been provided for foreign debt servicing. Of the total amount allocated for debt servicing, interest payments account for 61.2%, or 174.47 million. A sum of 110.56 million is provided for principal repayments. Principal repayments are forecast to decline relative to the projected outturn of 2021 to 2022. Of the 110.56 million allocated for principal repayments, 66.7 million is for externally contracted debt, with the remainder 43.03 million being programmed to cover the amortization of domestic debt. Interest provision has remained relatively flat when compared to the 2021-2022 approved estimates, but increased by 4.94 million, or 2.9% when compared to the outturn for 2021-2022. Debt service payments fluctuates as new debt payments are added to or existing debt matures. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to transfer payments, which include grants and contributions, subsidies and public assistance, we are proposing to allocate a sum of 212.39 million, representing an increase of 20.4%, or 46.03 million above the projected outturn for 2021-2022. The increased allocation reflects provision made for the Millennium Heights complex as the government continues full transition of health services from Victoria Hospital. Mr. Speaker, as a caring government, we have also allocated resources totaling 20.46 million for the public assistance program, reflecting an additional 9.06 million to help meet the welfare needs of this country, as well as to meet outstanding obligations for services rendered to paupers by the St. Jude Hospital. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding that the St. Lucia Tourist Board has been provided with some level of economic independence by way of a tourism levy, the reality is there is need to provide additional support to its marketing efforts until sufficient revenue is collected to provide a level of security for unforeseen shocks to the tourism industry. To this end, a sum of $5 million has been allocated to the St. Lucia Tourism Authority for the new financial year. The Department of External Affairs has also been allocated an additional $900,000 to assist the department in honoring its bilateral commitments. Mr. Speaker, as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must reflect the increased inflows from in-transit fees from the cruise ships going to the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority and the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority to support its operations. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the category of goods and services. My government proposes an increase of 19.35%, or 58.69 million, relative to the projected outrun for 2021-2022. The most significant increases were programmed under the operating and maintenance votes. The operating and maintenance vote received an increase of 17.38 million, reflecting additional resources provided under the Constituency Development Program, under the Department of Economic Affairs, as well as the Departments for Home Affairs and National Security and the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Transport. Provision was made for concerning services on the project expenditure, the continued acquisition of personal protective equipment, and rental of quarantine facilities. Mr. Speaker, the driving force behind the development expenditure program in the budget is the need to stimulate the economy through implementation of various projects. In that regard, my government has allocated some 561.06 million towards the implementation of various projects for the next fiscal year, comprising of 382 million of capital and 179 million of recurrent expenditure related to these projects. There may be a source of confusion between project expenditure, which I just referred to, and capital expenditure provided in the budget summary. The project expenditure figure does have a component of recurrent expenditure, which is not included in capital expenditure. This classification was necessary to provide a true indication of the total cost incurred in undertaking a specific project. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to capital expenditure for the new fiscal year, my government has allocated some $382.65 million to its capital program. This amount is made up of $12.67 million in locally funded capital expenditure and $369.98 million in externally funded capital expenditure. The proposed capital budget represents $104.11 million, or 72.8% increase over last year's revised estimates of $278.54 million. It is important to note that capital expenditure constitutes 68% of the total development budget of $561.06. This amount represents $167.32 million, or 70.2% increase over last year's revised estimates of $393.74. This is primarily due to emphasis placed on infrastructural development 30%, economic development 22%, health 8.08%, agriculture 5.95%, and education 5.25%, accounting for approximately 71.23% of the capital budget. Of the total allocation of $561.06 million for development projects and initiatives, $170.20 million, or 40%, is proposed for the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Transport. This amount will cater for payment of new and outstanding DFCs, reconstruction of bridges such as the Cul-de-Sac Bridge, rehabilitation of roads such as the Millennium Highway project, and for other ongoing road maintenance and rehabilitation projects. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Economic Development and the Youth Economy has been allocated $126.84 million, accounting for 22.6% of the development budget. The allocation for projects under the department represents a 224.7% increase over the approved budget allocations for 2021-2022. The developmental program for the department goes to primarily 4 major projects, namely the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, $43.7 million, the Constituency Development Project, $28.9 million, St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, $28.1 million, and the implementation of the youth economy, $10 million. Mr. Speaker, much has been said on the St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, and more details will be provided in my budget address later in April regarding the way forward for this project. However, a significant percentage of the allocated resources for St. Jude Hospital are to cover outstanding liabilities of the project. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health has allocated $45.31 million, or 8.08% of the development budget to the Department of Health to cover 1. The cost of the COVID-19 response, improvement in health facilities under the OECS Regional Health Program, commencement of the Universal Health Care Program, remedial works on the National Stadium currently housing the St. Jude Hospital. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Agriculture has been allocated a sum of $43.47 million, or 5.95% of the development budget, to facilitate the completion of ongoing projects such as the Viewfort Water Supply Redevelopment Project, and also to undertake various initiatives aimed at protecting food security. Mr. Speaker, the sum of $30.49 million, or 5.2% of the development budget, is also being proposed on behalf of the Department of Education for the coming year. Of the total amount allocated to the department, 64% is to cover the cost of activities under the EQUIP project. Therefore, emphasis will primarily be placed on the continuation of the renovation of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, continuation of new blocks such as the Laguerre Combined School, the Gordon Walcott Memorial School, the Miku Secondary School, the Enchipo Secondary, and Sufre Comprehensive Schools. A sum of $3 million has been allocated for the rehabilitation of schools. Mr. Speaker, central to the preparation of any budget is the identification of financial resources to cover the expenses that will be undertaken during the fiscal year. I now turn my attention to the revenue projections for the year 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, with the resurgence in economic activity that is expected in 2022 to 2023, the draft estimates have targeted total revenue and grants in the sum of $1.328 billion. At the projected level, total revenue and grants is forecast to increase by $248.1 million, or 23% above the preliminary outrun for the fiscal year 2021 to 2022. The forecast comprises of $1.15 billion in recurrent revenue, $10.7 million in capital revenue, and $176.7 million in grants. Grant receipts are expected to contribute an additional $121.7 million compared to the 2021 outrun of $55 million. This increase can be attributed to major progress over the last 2 years towards the procurement processes for 4 major grant finance projects. Mr. Speaker, recurrent revenue inflows are projected to increase by $148.6 million relative to the approved estimates for 2021-2022 to reach a total of $1.150 billion for the fiscal year. When compared to the revised estimates or outrun for the preceding year, recurrent revenue increased by $122.7 million, or 11.9%. The increase stems from slow but sustained recovery during the latter part of the fiscal year 2021 to 2022, and the continuation of the recovery anticipated in the tourism, construction, and agriculture sectors during the new fiscal year. The total projected recurrent revenue for 2022-2023 is comprised of tax revenue of $1.016 billion, or 88.4%, and $133.9 million in non-tax revenue. Tax revenue is forecast to increase by 9.5% in comparison to the outlay for 2021-2022, while non-tax revenue is expected to increase by 34.2% compared to the revised estimate for the preceding year. Mr. Speaker, the increase in tax revenue is influenced by the continuation of the recovery in economic activity resulting from the easing of COVID-19 pandemic. The significant increase in non-tax revenue is projected as a result of the higher anticipated CIP inflows expected to be deposited in the NEF, National Economic Fund, pursuant to the National Economic Fund Act. Let me add, Mr. Speaker, that we hope that the CIP program does not suffer from any adverse international shocks. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to the details of the projection for some of the major revenue lines under the tax revenue category. Taxes on income and profits. Taxes on income and profits are projected to amount to $256.1 million, up by $20.7 million, or 8.8% above the revised estimates for 2021 to 2022. This reflects expected increases in all the components of this category of revenue, namely income tax on corporations, income tax on individuals, withholding tax, and arrears. The projection for the main items under this category is as follows. Income tax on corporations. The revenue of income tax on corporations is expected to generate $73.1 million for the financial year 2022-2023, representing an 18.75% increase above the budgeted amount in 2021-2022, and an 8.69% increase above the outrun for 2021-2022. This reflects an upward trend as corporate profitability rebounds as a result of the higher economic activity expected from relaxing, adjusting restrictions on social events, end of curfews, and discontinuation of confinement, which had been implemented to manage and control the in-country spread of COVID-19. Revenue from income tax individuals is expected at 114.8 million. This represented a 2.9% increase from the 2021-22 revised estimates and reflects the anticipated uptick in the level of economic activity. The number of individuals projected to return to full-time employment is expected to increase, particularly in the tourism and construction sectors. Income tax arrears is projected at 49.8 million, an increase of 10.9 million, or 28.2% from the autumn of 2021-2022. The projected increase in corporate profitability, along with the increase over the medium term in the employment rate and collection of arrears in withholding tax, will positively influence the revenue outcome for this line. Mr. Speaker, taxes on international trade, customs duties are projected to increase by 14.15% to reach 236.4 million in 2020-2023, up from the revised estimates of 208.9 million in 2021-2022. This revenue category accounts for 19.28% of recurrent revenue. Of the total amount to be collected from taxes on international trade transactions, 126.4 million is expected to come from import duty, 103.5 million from excise tax, 4.4 million from throughput charges, and 2.1 million from passenger facility fees. The improvement in inflows from this revenue category is driven by the general increases in the CIF value for imported products. Taxes on domestic goods and services are expected to generate 515.7 million, which is 8.43% above the revised figure for 2021-2022. This reflects mostly the projection for VAT on domestic activity collected by the Inland Revenue Department and excise tax receipts from VAT collected by the Inland Revenue Department that account for 28.9% of revenue for this category, and is projected at 106.9 million, which represents 13.9% increase relative to the 2021-2022 outrun. Value-added tax VAT from international trade transactions collected by the Customs and Excise Department is projected to yield 165.5 million in 2022-2023, which is 5.38% above the outrun of 157 million in 2021-2022. As the economy rebounds, a higher level of economic activity is anticipated in the construction sector over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, airport tax is projected to record an increase of 16.41%, or 3.6 million, above the 2021-2022 outrun, to reach 25.5 million for the new fiscal year. This projection is influenced by the higher revenue intake anticipated from an increase in tourism arrivals, including stove arrivals, expected to increase by approximately 26.2% in the new fiscal year. Service charge on imports is projected to increase by 6.94 million, or 8.41% above the outrun for 2021-2022, to reach 89.5 million for the new fiscal year. This projection is influenced by the higher revenue intake anticipated from an increase in economic activity during this current fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, revenue collections from taxes on domestic goods and services account for 50.74% of total recurrent revenue and 44.83% of tax revenue. The 2023 projection for non-tax revenue is 133.9 million, or a 44.18% increase over 2021-2022 outturn. The main contributor to the increase in inflows during the current fiscal year is expected to be the contribution by the National Economic Fund in transit fees and sale of goods and services. The following are the major components of non-tax revenues and the expected performance in 2022 to 2023. Mr. Speaker, given the passage of legislation for the establishment of the National Economic Fund, inflows from the CIP are expected to be deposited in the NEF. In light of this, revenue for voluntary transfers reflects anticipated receipts of 65 million from the National Economic Fund. Mr. Speaker, it's my government's intention to make an application to the NEF to request the use of some of that money to finance the St. Jude Hospital Stadium project and a 40 million to contribute towards the debt principal requiring a bullet payments. Overall revenue from voluntary transfers is anticipated to increase by 24.9 million or 59.8% over the outturn for 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, receipts from in-transit fees. Receipts from in-transit fees are projected to increase by 44.8 million or to 8.02 million when compared to the outrun for 2021-2022. This category reflects a fee charge to cruise ships passengers who have not disembarked from the vessel at port. An increase of 4.2 million is projected in 2022-2023, and this revenue line will be favorably impacted given the return of the cruise industry, the gradual increase in the number of cruise passengers, and cruise ship calls. Revenue collection from the sale of goods and services are projected to record a sum of 59.01 million, reflecting an increase of 8.3 million or 16.41% over the revised estimates for the previous financial year. The major revenue lines contributing to the increase of 8.3 million include motor vehicle driver licenses and sale of drugs and vaccines. Motor vehicle driver licenses. Revenue from motor vehicle licenses is projected to record an increase of 3.01 million when compared to the revised estimates. This category is positively correlated with the number of driver licenses renewed and the number of vehicles imported annually. Increases are generally observed every triennium, the last one being the fiscal year 2019 to 2020. Consequently, this increase is anticipated in 2022-2023, given the upcoming triennium. Revenue collections from this category is expected to increase by 1.02 million. That is income from property taxes, Mr. Speaker. Property taxes on commercial properties, to reach 4.14 million for the new fiscal year. This projection represents an increase above the revised estimates for 2021-2022. Grant revenue. Based on commitments and arrangements signed with development partners, grant revenue is estimated at 176.7 million, reflecting a 121.7 million increase compared to the projected outturn for 2021-2022 fiscal year. This amount represents 46% of the total capital expenditure program for the new fiscal year. This more optimistic forecast is predicted on disbursements anticipated from continuation and commencement of projects to be funded by the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA, the Taiwanese government, the UK Caribbean Infrastructural Partnership, UK CIF, the European Development Fund, EDF, and the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, and the United Nations Environmental Programming Unit. Mr. Speaker, while we anticipate moderate improvement in revenue administration and grant receipts from friendly donors, a significant financing gap remains. As was highlighted earlier in my presentation, based on the projected revenue for revenue and grants, the budget targets an overall deficit of 394.57 million for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023. When added to principal repayments for the financial year, a gap of 505.1 million is anticipated, which will be financed by a blend of foreign and domestic financing resources, in addition to the total revenue of 1.327 million. It is anticipated that my government will have to borrow a total of 505.12 million, comprises of 425.4 million, equivalent to 84.2% of the total financial requirement for the year from external sources. And domestic financing is expected to be moderate, given that much lower amounts are programmed from bonds, treasury bills, etc. This is entirely in keeping with my government's strategy of relying on external borrowing on concessional terms rather than market debt, which bears higher interest rates. Domestic financing requirement amounts to 79.7 million, which is expected to be sourced through various means, including treasury bills, treasury notes, and bonds. The total amount to be raised from external sources will be as follows: Caribbean Development Bank, 57.3 million. International Development Association, 82.3 million. Republic of China and Taiwan, 191.8 million. CARICOM Development Fund, 3.06 million. CDB Inter-American Development Bank, 8.6 million. Canadian Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility, 1.4 million. World Bank Development Policy Credit, 81 million. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to highlight some of the expenses that government will undertake in this final year in some of the ministries. Mr. Speaker, an additional amount of $10 million is programmed under the Constituency Development Program to undertake small community infrastructural projects. An additional amount of 7.27 million program under St. Jude Hospital Rehabilitation Project for settlement of outstanding liabilities. Mine. Yeah. The briefcase of person. $300,000 was approved to facilitate St. Lucia's ascension to the Caribbean Court of Justice. $954,800 was approved for outstanding amounts owed to Ojo Labs, whose contract expired in October 2021. $1 million was approved for the disaster fund. $1 million was approved for the distress fund. In the Attorney General's office, 500 was approved to procure the services of additional legislative drafters, and $2 million to facilitate the payment of settlements agreed in court cases. Provision of $1 million was made on the Consulting Services and Commissions Office of the DPP to account for the appointment of a special prosecutor and support staff. The Swift Justice Project, for the backlog of cases, 456 million in recurrent expenditure. That is to the backlog of cases in the courts. And a further amount of 2,278,600. The project breakdown, Mr. Speaker, for the Swift Justice Project is as follows. Salaries, 487,100. Sharpening 135,000. Stationery supplies and materials 81,500. Electricity and water 63,000. Rental and hire 1 million. Operation and maintenance 12 million. Plant machinery and equipment 456,000. That is to clean up the backlog of cases that exist in the
Mr. Minister for Finance, you may continue. We do apologize for that break in continuity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to put on the record, when I spoke of the increase for civil servants, the increase is in April this year. That is next month, Mr. Speaker. The civil servants will get the increase. And further, Mr. Speaker, the civil servants will get part of their back pay in December 2022, the first tranche, a back pay in December this year, and the second tranche will be in March 2023, Mr. Speaker. So I repeat, civil servants, the increase is in April, that is in your pay packets this month, April next month, and next month your increase will be in the bank, and your back pay will be there, the first tranche in December 2022 and the second tranche in March 2023. And Mr. Speaker, the Swift Justice Project, which is aimed at reducing the backlog of cases. Let me just read the breakdown again, Mr. Speaker. Salaries and wages, 487,100. Traveling, 135,000. Stationery and supplies, 81,500. Electricity and water, 63,000. Rental and hire, 1 million. Operation and maintenance, 12,000, and equipment, 456,000. So this is the Swift Justice Project to reduce the backlog of cases in the system, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to some expenses from the Department of Home Affairs and National Security. Mr. Speaker, an amount of 1.824,500,000 to be spent on repairs to the Bordelais Correctional Facility. 1.039 million earmarked for the removal and replacement of the chain link fencing and replacement of cell locks and one-out keys at the facility. 785,000 is earmarked for the replacement of skylights and the repair of the inmate toilets, repairs to the metal stairs in the units, and purchase and installation of hot water heaters for the laundry, kitchen, and medical units. There will also be some renovation done to the staff quarters, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, still on police and crime, and repairs to police stations, 4.776 million. Other than that, Mr. Speaker, you may recall that the custody suites were taken away. We have earmarked 1.337 million for the retrofitting of temporary holding cells at the police headquarters on top of this street. 2.7 million for the urgent repairs to the roof of the Viewfort police station. And 738,000 for the general repair work to various police island-wide facilities throughout the island, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is trying to not only talk, but have some tangible increase in expenditure for the police, so that we appreciate their work, so they can not only have more comfortable environment to work in, Mr. Speaker, but they can get some training and some equipment, including vehicles, which they need, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think I should also add some of the increases in grants and contributions that we are making in this budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Folk Research Center, the building got damaged. And we are beginning by giving them an allocation of $50,000 to help them to begin to prepare their plans, etc., for their new building. $50,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hope from the Ministry of Equity, Mr. Speaker. We are financing hope in the sum of $2.764 million, Mr. Speaker. This St. Lucie home, Mr. Speaker, we are increasing the allocation to $140,000. There's a new program, Mr. Speaker, Our Boys Matter, to halt the boys seem to be becoming, and some of them are going astray, Mr. Speaker. We have programmed $223,000 for the Our Boys Matter program. Still in the Ministry of Equity, Mr. Speaker, apart from the housing program of $10 million in the Ministry of Housing, we are programming $1.316 million for housing assistance to the poor, the disabled, and the differently able and the poor. Educational assistance, Mr. Speaker, we are programming another $1.824 million for educational assistance, Mr. Speaker. That is in addition to this financial year, we are going to continue the payment of facility fees in the sum of $2.358 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, payment of mathematics and English TXC will continue this year in the sum of $270,554. Mr. Speaker, there's an organization called the Child Development and Guidance Center. I think it's located at La Clery, doing human service, Mr. Speaker. And it's really touching to see the work that's done up there. The government showing appreciation for the efforts. We are increasing their subvention by $150,000, Mr. Speaker, from $230,000 to $380,000 for the Child Development Center, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the faces of cancer, we are giving them a contribution of $10,000, Mr. Speaker. And we are also increasing the contribution to the St. Lucia Cancer Society to $40,000. Contribution to the St. Lucia Diabetic and Hypertensive Association to $50,000, Mr. Speaker. And to Feed the Poor Ministry, $20,000. Mr. Speaker, the National Sports Elite Athlete Education Assistance, we are increasing it from $60,000 to $110,000. And the National Youth Council, we're increasing there to $52,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Fashion Council, the St. Lucia Fashion Council, we are giving them a contribution of $90,000 this year, Mr. Speaker. And the St. Lucia Bakers Association, they are getting a contribution of $30,000 to help them to establish their organization, make some changes so that we can see what happens, how that manifests itself in the prices, Mr. Speaker. The St. Lucia National Trust, this year we are returning the $700,000 for them. Mr. Speaker, that is a summary of the increases in the grants, Mr. Speaker, that we are doing this year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I just want to make it clear again that the civil servants increase is going to be in April 2022. And the back pay, the first tranche, is going to be in December 2022, and the second tranche in March 2023. Mr. Speaker, let me once again take the opportunity to thank the people of St. Lucia for the confidence and the patience and the confidence they have reposed in us to lead this country, Mr. Speaker, out of its current economic circumstances. Mr. Speaker, we are a different team. We are a team of St. Lucians who understand the plight of St. Lucia. None of us were born with a golden spoon. None of us were privileged to be able to live a certain lifestyle, Mr. Speaker. We are children of ordinary and regular people, Mr. Speaker. And we understand the plight of ordinary people, Mr. Speaker. And this is why this budget, these estimates, Mr. Speaker, reflect that philosophical underpinning, Mr. Speaker, to put people first, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that the achievements made since assuming office will continue to be felt in the months ahead, as we work steadily and tirelessly towards accelerated recovery following the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, as the allocations program in this budget indicates, we intend to continue to tackle the challenges with boldness and confidence. We remain optimistic, assured and rooted in our resolve to maintain economic stability and chart a path to sustainable growth and development. We will pursue the initiatives and programs funded in this budget to bring transformative change that will impact lives and livelihoods of our citizens and will put the people first. We have approached this budget with the understanding that the current circumstances, domestic, regional, international, within which we operate, and we are strengthening our belief that while current resources may be insufficient to meet the needs of all, our collective potential and our resolve to put our economy on a path of broad-based inclusive growth will empower our people and propel us forward. Mr. Speaker, I would like to extend my thanks to all the civil servants in the ministries, departments, and agencies of government that have contributed to the successful completion of the budget process. Particularly those with direct responsibility for the preparation and compilation of the estimates of revenue, Mr. Speaker. And I want to express my thanks and appreciation to the staff of the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy, who spearheaded this process, Mr. Speaker, and brought this exercise to a successful completion. Mr. Speaker, I've attended several meetings with the staff of the Ministry of Finance, and I can attest to their professionalism, Mr. Speaker. And all what I can say is I thank them for their resolve and their belief in doing their job as public servants, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of the people of St. Lucia. And I thank them, Mr. Speaker. I thank them sincerely for that. I have respected their professionalism. I have not intimidated them. I have not insulted them. I have not told them to know their place. All I've done is I've taken their advice, Mr. Speaker, and together we've created that budget and will continue to do so during this term of government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the staff of the Parliament, Mr. Speaker, the staff of the Parliament for the work that they've been doing, Mr. Speaker. All the staff, and you, Mr. Speaker, and the police and the security people who have worked with us during this budget, Mr. Speaker. Finally, the National Printing Corporation, Mr. Speaker, who have printed these estimates under tremendous pressure, Mr. Speaker. The staff of the Office of the Prime Minister, who again have worked tirelessly, Mr. Speaker. My press secretary, my personal assistant, and my secretary, who have worked relentlessly to get me here today, Mr. Speaker. I only have thanks and gratitude to them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity. Finally, I want to thank my colleagues for the way we've worked together, Mr. Speaker. It's a group of men and women who have one purpose in mind: to improve the quality of life of the people of St. Lucia. And all the rumors, all the anticipation of discord and disunity, Mr. Speaker, we are stronger than ever, and we will continue to work for the benefit of the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I thank my colleagues for allowing me the opportunity to present the 2023 estimates of revenue and expenditure to this honorable House and by extension to the people of St. Lucia. I so move.
Honourable members, the question is that the Honourable House of Assembly do adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2022-2023 in the sum of $1,842,813,200, and do agree that the said sum do form a charge against the consolidated fund and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stands adjourned until Wednesday, March 30th, 2022 at 10 a.m., Mr. Speaker.
Before I put the question, members, may I join with the Minister for Finance and Prime Minister in, first of all, thanking you, the members, who took time off your very busy schedule yesterday to attend a very important occasion, the funeral service of slain officer Nathan Timet. I think the family appreciated seeing so many members of Parliament present. So thank you very much. I wanted to thank the members of the Printry. In fact, last night somebody asked me if the Printry still operates. Well, the Parliament would not be able to operate were it not for the efficiency of the Printry. Up to this morning, we got amendments to the estimates that the Printry printed in record time and passed on to all members. So our thanks to the management and staff of the Printry. Our police officers, again, as I said earlier, it could not have been easy for our police officers after such a ceremony yesterday to make it here today to not only protect the members of Parliament, but to provide other useful services. So thank you very much to the Commissioner and members of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. And the staff of the Parliament, I'm directing that to a particular member. The staff of the Parliament, the best staff in the entire government service. I want to thank them for all the work they have done, all the late hours, all of the due diligence they have performed. Thank you very much to my staff. Honourable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned until Wednesday, March 30th at 10 a.m. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
Well, there you have it. The estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2022-23 in the sum of $1,842,813,200 as a charge against the consolidated and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. The debate on the estimates will begin at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Earlier today, this morning, we heard from the throne speech delivered by Acting Governor General Errol Charles. I am Winston Springer. Lisa?
Thank you very much for that. And just to slightly recap for you, we did hear from the Prime Minister that we have in the range of $4.776 million for repairs of police stations island-wide, and as we have been saying all day, that certainly the state of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, juxtaposed that with the work it has to do with the safety and security of the nation. The government is committed to providing all of the resources necessary to enable the police force to meet that mandate. Also, there's some $1.337 million that has been set aside for the retrofitting of temporary cells, and that really is sort of the custody suites, creating that holding space for suspects, persons to be detained by the police for questioning and so forth. The Prime Minister did detail assistance that the government is going to be given to non-governmental organizations. The Focus Center, for example, is receiving some $50,000, which he explained is going to help it sort of prepare its plan for rebuilding. Let's not forget that the FRC, that its home, its headquarters, had been gutted by fire, and so that is to go towards the rebuilding process. Some $140,000 to the St. Lucy's home. It has been doing great work for St. Lucia senior citizens. The Our Boys Matter program receiving some $283,000. For the vulnerable, they're within the Ministry of Equity, Social Transformation and Empowerment. There is some $1.361 million that has been set aside for the housing assistance for the vulnerable. A further $1.824 million for the educational assistance program, and that of course falls within eligibility for the Social Development Fund, the SSDF. The government has recommitted to paying the not facility fees, but the CXC fees for students. And remember that the government fulfilled a promise for CXC fee payments for mathematics and English for the Form 5 students, and it will be doing so again to the tune of $2.358 million. The government has also increased subvention for one of the institutions that does miraculous work with children with special needs and disabilities, and that is the Child Guidance Development Center. It's going to receive more than $100,000 of an increase in its annual subvention, taking it to over $300,000 for the year. The Faces of Cancer receiving support as well from the government of St. Lucia with a $10,000 contribution. The Cancer Society also receiving $40,000. The St. Lucia Diabetic and Hypertension Association receiving $50,000, and the Feed the Poor Ministry there receiving $20,000. The St. Lucia Fashion Council, which has been doing work with St. Lucia's young and aspiring designers, models, and so forth, receiving some $90,000 there for it to continue its work. And as you heard from Winston Springer, the debate on the estimates begins Wednesday morning, that's at 10 a.m. We want to thank you for being with us throughout this day, and we are looking forward to providing you with another day of coverage come Wednesday, March 30th, 2022, when the debate on the estimates and revenue of expenditure for 2022-2023 begins. On behalf of Winston Springer, Primus Hutchinson, and all of the team here, the GIS team, I am Mr. Joseph, thanking you for watching.